point of using what you have. I was very fortunate that a friend of mine had a couple of the Bachmann 440 sound value locomotives that he was no longer using and gifted to me. And the first thing I thought, because one of them had problems, was I was going to make a V&T engine out of this, having seen Ryan Blake's and other people's projects in the same vein. So I decided to do something a little different and take a swing at doing Dayton. Because I model 1900, I could model Dayton after it was rebuilt in 1882, so the tender's more like a Baldwin-style tender, although a bit longer than the others. And that kind of allowed me to kind of go down the rabbit hole of working on this little project. And I had hoped to have it completely finished by the time of the conference, but I'm about 3/4 of the way done. And I have the locomotive here, so tomorrow you can come see it operate in the display room. So we'll start here. So this is the victim. This is the new Bachmann retooling. And one of the things you'll notice here is they've actually put in all of the rivets, the seam line, these bolts and everything here. Even the trucks are higher quality than my United brass Renos. And working on these actually prompted me to get rid of the brass ones and replace them all with Bachmanns, which will be future projects. So this was the donor, or one of the donors, to get spliced here. And so I've taken, this is a Jupiter tender, and I made a little note here for myself where I'm going to cut. And then I took the front half of a 119 tender, and basically I did this the old-fashioned way with a razor saw and a little bit of green putty to stitch it back together, and a lot of sanding. And I probably could have sanded a bit more, but I'll live with it. And you get a good sense of all of the detail. I mean, even the edge along the bead here on the tender flare is excellently modeled. The back, again, rivet line. There's no rivets in here, but there is, again, rivet line. Everything is quite spectacular. When they revised this, they must have used a drawing of Genoa or something. One of the modifications I made to the tender, well, let's go back real quick, is I filled in the rear tender sill to widen it out closer to Dayton's. I put the taper on the bottom and then used a lot of green putty again to fill it in and sand it smooth. The next step was actually to do the front beam, which is a little, I didn't get the taper quite right. But then I actually took, these are precision scale early C16 steps, and I actually twisted this one around to wrap around the front of the sill like Dayton. Some things are not exact. This model is, it looks close enough, and that was really what I was going for. So again, here's another step added here. And I used a little bit of green putty on the steps to fill in the safety tread that's cast into them to make them look a little bit more like wood. And we'll see that again in a bit. Here's one of the tender trucks that is completely stripped, and it's molded in silver plastic. But you can see the detail in here is quite astounding, including the brakes and everything else. So I left these intact. At one point in the future, I will modify them. So they're running on 26-inch wheels instead of the 30-inch wheels that the Dayton would actually have. The obvious reason I didn't do that yet is that I have to change the brakes around to fit that. And that'll be since these pop out of the truck or out of the tender, it's really easy to come back and work on this later. So here they are painted. And to take them out, I actually just clipped the wire off the DCC. It's a pretty simple job. Here is a locomotive, and to work on the drivers, because these are Baldwin drivers, they're very wonderful copies of what's on, it looks like what's on Inyo. To make them look like Dayton's drivers, I actually dropped them out and took a jeweler saw and cut the counterweights out, and then filed them kind of square. What I did after that, I didn't get a picture of it, is filled that in with putty and everything else to make a smooth surface, and then cut wedges out of styrene and fit them on before gluing them. So they're not perfect, but when the engine's running by, it looks the way it should. So these are 3D printed parts from Shapeways. And unfortunately, I meant to bring a parts list to give you guys, but since I'm going to have to do a two-part talk and finish it up next year, I'll bring the part list then and give you all of the links to get all of these different items. If you do come talk to me, I can share that with you now. I just didn't have a handout in time. So these were made by a fellow named Nathaniel, and I forget what his shop on Shapeways is. But these parts are actually meant to go on the Bachmann engine. And so you've got the smoke box door, the headlight. It actually came with the earlier style Stevens headlight bracket, but because after the rebuild it didn't have that anymore, I skipped that part. The trouble with any 3D part from Shapeways is that it does take a lot of preparation and work to get this completely smooth. If you look at it really close on the model, you can kind of tell it's printed, but whatever. Now for the bell stand, and this isn't done on the model yet, I actually got a hold of a number of Mason bogey bells, which are Mason bells, and started modifying them to get close to what would be used on a Stevens or a normal Mason locomotive. These aren't finished. This was the first pass after I actually sanded the raised part here where the valve gear goes through the top of the bell stand on a Mason bogey. That was a lot of work. And when I was working on this, I joked that somewhere out there a South Park fan is crying. So here's the boiler. There's really nice detail here actually for the bands. The domes are actually removable, so you could put just a different dome top on, but the ones I was using had the whole shebang, so that meant I had to take all of that detail off. And that took a lot of sanding, and a lot of sanding. And I realized to put the bands back on that I could just make the bands out of brass. This is a Detail Associates, I think 2420, and it works perfectly. It also works really well. You can put it between the molded part of the band perfectly. So if you have a normal engine and you want to go that extra mile, you can cut those and put them in. And I actually took measurements for you to save you the hassle of dealing with that if you want to do that in the future. So as I started reassembling things, I added, these are early lubricators, but I cut the bottom valves off to better match what we see in photos on Dayton. You can see everything starting to get a lovely coat of nice black paint for 1900. One thing, I did think about changing the pilot, and I had a spare brass Reno in parts that I almost robbed the pilot from, but I realized I wanted to be able to switch with this engine, and in the time being, I wasn't able to come up with a workable iron pilot with a coupler, so I just left the wooden slat pilot on for now. So here is the tender. After a little more work, you can see I've added some hooks here to the back. There's going to be more detail. I did add a rivet, or 2 rivet lines in here using Archer rivets, which you'll see hopefully in a bit. I didn't want to make any heavy modifications to the cab. I just wanted it to look right at the first glance, so I used a little bit of styrene. This is actually 1x2, HO scale 1x2 styrene added in to kind of separate the panel a little bit. And I added a little bit more here to the rear to frame in the back of the cab. Here is the tender after the first coat of paint, so I stripped the molded grab irons off, which will go back on later. And you can see I wound up using a product I'd never used before based on a suggestion from a friend. It's called Mr. Surfacer, and it's a leveling primer. So you can spray it on, and a lot of the defects that I had in the tender from sanding and other things, it completely covered over. Now, if you get real close like this photo, you can see a couple more. I'm not going to worry about it. It looks good enough. Here's the finished tender painted black. Now it still has a coal load, and I have cordwood that was made. My girlfriend spent a considerable amount of time making cordwood. We set up the chopper, we measured it out, and I have a lot of cedar in my yard. So these is cedar saplings that have aged about a year and cut to 3-foot lengths in HO scale. So eventually those will go on the tender, and I left the coal mound on there to make my life easier making the big prototypical wood stack, so I didn't have to put 40 pieces of wood on there and stack it up. So here is the driver after the modification and filling back in. And unfortunately, because it's black, it's like a black hole, you can't really see it. But we'll get another view of it here in a bit. Here's the drivers put back in, and again, more work here, kind of covering this stuff up. The underside of the jacket I painted with the Russia iron paint that I'm using, which I'll talk about more in a second. And some of the valve gear, which isn't polished yet, will buff up in nice shiny metal and should give a really nice appearance when this is all done. So here's the boiler back from being painted, and this is actually Humbrol metal coat polished steel. And I've tried every paint that buffs up into a metal color. I've used all the Testors metallizers. I've used, the only thing I haven't messed with is a lot of Alclad stuff, and there's some really nice products there. And this stuff I tried on a model, and it reflects the way you need the jacket to do. And I have pictures I didn't put in the slideshow of components I did for one of my Garden Railroad engines, and I took photographs outside where I'm reflecting things in the foreground, where you're getting blue from the sky, you're getting a very beautiful reaction. But you can't see it in this photo because I haven't polished it yet. And I brought the locomotive up this way, so tomorrow I will polish the jacket and we can take it outside and give it a really good look. So here is the engine as of this morning, put back together. I actually did a test run. Being ready to run in DCC and sound, it was really a matter of reconnecting 2 wires and putting all the screws back in. And I have a very nice start on an engine that is going to take me another couple months to finish, well, another month. But I'm already very glad I took on this project, and I'm very pleased with how this has turned out. And we'll cover the rest later when we get there. The tender's longer on, yeah, that tender tank on Dayton is longer than, is longer than Ineos. So I had the wonderful book on the Dayton, and I took measurements and figured out it was a couple feet longer. And so
the model is longer? Or
no, the Dayton's tender. And so I had to extend that. The frame is fine. The frame is more or less the right size. I just had to lengthen that shell part out. Yeah, that and the drivers were the hardest part.
Did you cut 2 tenders together to get that?
Yeah, so it's 2 different tenders, yeah. And then that's why if you actually look at it, part of it's got a wood burning load and part of it's a coal burning load. Any other questions?
What was the paint again for on the boiler?
It's Humbrol metal coat polished steel. And I'll show you some other pictures of it later, and I've got that whole parts list. Yeah, that really, I bought it sort of just as an experiment to see how it would turn out, and it turned my head immediately.
Okay. Now, Cliff Jennings. Cliff Jennings here?
Yep.
Oh, there it is. Right. Cliff Jennings is going to talk about V&T's snowplow, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Really close.
Really close?
There we go.
Wow. Okay.
Dangerously close.
Well, I'm Cliff. I'm from Maryland, and my wife is here with me for the first time in these conferences. So. We're going to be talking about. I didn't anticipate operating 2 devices. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the V&T snow plows. Plows plural. We're not going to be talking about the little plow, which they use in later years. We're going to be talking about, by the way, I'm not going to be reading this stuff. If you want this presentation, let me know. Give me your name and email address, and I'll send you a link. But we're going to be talking about the big plow. Okay? And there wasn't just one plow. There was at least 2 and maybe more big plows that the V&T used. So we'll talk about the first plow first. And if I'm wrong, just talk to Stephen and we'll work it out, okay? But the earlier plow, you'll notice there's these side slats that supported the edges, the two edges of the plow, and they continued up past the curved portion, and they were held down by tie rods. We're going to get back to that, but the earliest V&T snow plows, or plow, had this feature. But 11 years after it was installed for the first time, it had a bad day on January 25th, 1890 at the American Flat Switch. And here's the Dayton, and which Andrew was just talking about. And the Dayton, is that better? Wow, I gotta really hold it close. Okay. Here's the Dayton, and that first snow plow having a bad day. And this is the same event. It still has those side beams, and there's a nut and a tie rod holding that thing down. We'll get back to that. And the V&T may have been encouraged by that event to make an additional plow or a replacement design for this one, but that leads us to the second big plow. In November of the same event, the same year that event was, here's the bill of materials that Stephen supplied to me for the new plow. Oops. You see V&T new snow plow, and we're going to come back to that bill of materials in a little bit. But after that era, or that year, we see that the plow no longer had that extended design where it was the side beams extending on either side of the smoke box and being held down there. They had a different way of bracing the plow after 1890. And I'm just going to flash forward through some pics of this second plow. Here it is, 1906, 1910 in Virginia City. Can't really see it, but let's move forward here in Carson City. But everything after 1890 lacked this beam coming up on the side there. The epic 1916 snow event with the Dayton in the lead with 3 other locomotives pushing it. And you please see Mike and Stephen's book about the Dayton, from Workhorse to Hollywood Queen, for more photos of this of the locomotive. But for the meantime, for our purposes, I'm going to be showing some more photos of the second plow. 1938, again 1938, and 1938 was the year that the Dayton was sold to Paramount Studios, but they didn't want the plow, and of course the V&T still needed a plow, which brings up the portability of the snowplow. This second plow was able to be put on multiple locomotives. Well, multiple devices, let's put it that way. Here it is, set on a frame, 1900 era, sitting out, ready to be used. Here it is, well, there's a little bit of controversy, Stephen, I think. Here it is parked on the Santiago. However, the date is 1890, February. This is 1 month after the January event where the Dayton went off the rails. So this may have been a second snowplow even before the bill of materials of November of that year was made. So again, there may have been 3 snowplows involved, but it's just hard to say. Anyway, back to number 2 snowplow, and we'll forget the other ones for now. Here it is. Okay, the Dayton was sold in 38, and here the plow was parked on number 25. come back to this, but this upper edge was heavily reinforced at this juncture. Here again, the Dayton number 25. But in 1948, the plow's final platform became car 51, flanger number 2. And here we get a better view of this reinforced upper edge and cross members. And at that time, after they took it off the 25 and put it on this car, we see they put a lifting lug there and some side fins here, side wings, and that helps the snow to push up into the curve area and overboard and out to the side instead of just kind of splashing beside the rails. And that leads into just the overall design of the plow. And I want to point out with this figure, the plow was basically, no matter what design or configuration, it was mounted on the pilot beam, which acts as a fulcrum. And the problem is that the snow is always going to want to push that leading edge down into the rail. And that would be a bad day for the locomotive. If that caught, the pilot truck would come off and bad stuff would happen. So you have to find a way to react that force to keep that leading edge off the rail. In the first design, they counteracted that tendency with these beams on the side of the blade that I pointed out earlier. In the second design, they didn't have those beams extending on the side of the smoke box, but they would have a big push rod mounted on the side of the smoke box, pushing on the side of the lower frame, and that performed the same function. In addition, the blades needed to retain their shape against the severe forces of the snow you were blasting through. And this is an amazing shot of that epic snowstorm in 1916. Here's the Dayton shoving the plow up to Virginia City, and look how far the snow is being thrown to the side, maybe 80 feet or so. Well, snow doesn't want to do that, right? It's going to want to crush that blade. It's going to want to flatten it out, and you don't want to lose that trajectory. Otherwise, you're going to just be throwing snow on your passengers and so forth. You don't want to do that. So there's heavy reinforcing on the back sides of the blades, reinforced angles and straps riveted onto the blade to help to retain that curvature. Secondly, you have to have members from side to side pushing the blade, the two blades apart to make sure they don't crush together. In the later application of this plow, they helped that design out by putting in significantly reinforced side-to-side compression members. And then again, there's this plate perhaps welded on to the blades. But I want to talk about the leading edge. You know that, of course, the leading edge of the blade is going to be the one doing the most work. It's going to be intercepting that ice and snow right on the track, and you need it to be a strong leading edge, right? So back to the bill of materials from 1890 for the second snowplow, or the new snowplow they call it. The materials were generally, materials for the main blade were a 1/4-inch iron sheet. That was the bulk of it. But there was one steel plate, a 1/2 inch thick steel plate, 30 inches wide by 120 inches long. Now, measuring from a drawing by Mike Collins, 30 inches is exactly what that leading edge would be from the railhead to around where it was structurally supported by the main structure under there. And 120 inches is about how wide the snowplow was. So this half-inch thick, 30-inch by 10-foot plate is, I think, the leading edge of the plow. And that's what we see in the photographs. All the photographs have this big seam line where there's no seam in the center, but there's this plate going all across, all across, all across, all across, all across. Now, the only weakness of this design is that to make sure that the upper surfaces are flush, so that the snow, scoots along that upper surface, you have to notch that lower edge of these beams because of the 1/4 inch difference of material, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but anytime you notch anything, that's a chance of propagating or introducing a cracking point. And that's what happened, apparently. In 37, this is the Dayton again, that leading edge of plate separated right where that seam line is, and it took away the 5 beams that were supporting it while doing so. So speaking of structure, we have a lower frame, horizontal frame, with some XPX members and a fastening connection to a tensile member up back to the pilot beam. And there's 5 beams supporting what effectively the floor of the snowplow. As far as the form of the blade, I had to mess around with the radius, radii, because of modeling it in G gauge and so forth. I'll get to that in a minute, but if you were to look at the curvature as edge on, like looking down the axis of the curvature, it would just be a simple curve. And so they probably, well, they could do it 2 ways. They could rivet the pieces together and, put it through the rolling mill, gradually rolling it back and forth, until they get that curve. Well, I think that's how they did it, but you either cut the pieces after the fact or before the fact, but you end up with this fairly simple shape. And then, then the leading edge was connected, and you'd form the center lip onto each half of the main 1/4 inch sheets and rivet it together, sew it up in some form. So having done the research, I went into the model. Of course, as always, I start with a drawing from Mike Collins. And I used that, Mike Collins was on one edge, one side of the problem, and Bachman was on the other side of the problem. I had to make a snowplow that would fit on a 440 from, I'm modeling in large scale, so, and I wanted to do a 260 to represent the Santiago, just for fun. So I modeled a 1:20.3 version from the front end of Mike's drawing. And then I also independently modeled from just measuring my Bachman models, a different model. And I compared them. And it wasn't really good. Here's the red Bachman thing, and it's way up above the rail. And that would mean that I would have to extend the leading edge of the plow blade down that much further to meet the rail head. And in addition to this, since large scales inherently, like these Bachmann models are inherently narrow gauge, I had to squish the whole blade from 10 foot to about 8 foot in width. So I also needed to do a substructure to back the blade up and connect it firmly to the Bachmann model. And the photos don't really show exactly how anything was supported here, so I just winged it. So totally prototypical, but it bolts through the pilot deck and then reaches between and beneath the headlight brackets and screws down into the smoke box. At first I tried to make it the parts with a Anycubic Photon S printer. This was my first attempt with resin printing. And there was a steep learning curve. I tried it with PLA, PLA filament printing, also resin printing, and it was just a mess. I went through a lot of parts. And I came up with a final version, sorta, but it wasn't looking really good. The lines weren't mating up. And it was about this time that Anycubic, I'd owned this machine for like 2 months, 3 months, and the same company said, voila, we have a much better machine. It does 4 times the volume, 3 times the speed, and better detail. And I'm like, oh, great, why didn't you tell me? So I sold that machine and bought the bigger machine, which is Anycubic Mono X. That allowed me to print the whole blade in one shot, better detail, really stable dimensions. The other substructures, I used this resin is kind of hard to glue sometimes, so I used a methacrylate product which kicks in about 30 seconds, so you put it together and you clamp the heck out of it and hope for the best, because it doesn't come apart. And then the print, I printed it with holes, but I drilled them out with a little tiny drill bit, and the rivets are represented by a flathead jewelry pin. And after weathering, some of the detail parts were just printed separate, so I could paint them separate. Here's the behind structure as it's about to be screwed to the smoke box. And the push rods, I mean, in the prototype, this would be the main thing, to make that plow not dip into the rail, but in the model, it's just cosmetic. And here it is. I used the Santiago as kind of a guinea pig. And now on to the Dayton. In December of 2020, I realized, I found out the hard way that the Bachmann model of the 440 and the 260 were entirely different. They look exactly the same, but my parts fit. So I redid the computer model and went through that cycle again. And so, long story short, here's my representation of the Dayton plow on a 440. Obviously this is not a good model of the Dayton itself, but that's a future project. And here the two are together. And Mike Collins, I sent this picture to Mike Collins. He said that there's no way that those two locomotives would have ever been facing that way. How would that happen? But, well, it looks good on the shelf for one thing. And I think of it as the plow of love. Plow. Sorry. So that's about it. Yeah. Can I answer any questions?
Have you actually tried plowing into any snow like the Dayton and throwing the snow 80 feet?
After all that, I was afraid to. But I should be able to. With that back structure now, I should be able to do that. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, that's interesting. Okay, David? There he is. David Arenders. Mound House Depots, he's going to talk about that. His models. Right? That's what it says. We can get around that. Mound House.
Good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mound House depots. Starting off with a map of the Mound House area. Mound House is actually quite an interesting part to model on the V&T because it has the Carson and Colorado coming in with the V&T main line. And if you're doing modeling, the interchange between narrow gauge and standard gauge could be an interesting little thing to model. I got started the other year because Mike Collins did a drawing on the Virginia and Truckee freight station, and I built a model of that, which at the last convention, I believe, I talked about. But then in the Narrow Gauge and Chart Line Gazette, there was an article about the V&T passenger station in Mound House. And this was the passenger station used between the V&T and the Carson and Colorado. And today I discovered something that I wasn't quite aware of and had to change my slides. The first Mound House freight station, which in the today's little magazine on the last page showed a picture of the first V&T freight station. And interestingly, from what I can see, it looks very close to that. And this is a drawing of the Dayton Depot. Also, I learned that I was not aware of is the first V&T passenger depot burnt in 1879, which is just before the Carson and Colorado. And as like I think most of us were aware, somehow some magic thing happened that the Dayton Depot originally came from Mound House. So, and I don't know all of the details, but my first guess is that the depot burnt in 1879. They needed a replacement quickly, and it looked as though the replacement looked very close to the original depot. So my best guess is that the replacement was built very possibly to the original plans of the original freight depot in Mound House, and was then, because of the Carson and Colorado coming in, was replaced with a larger passenger depot and moved to Dayton. That is my best guess of what happened. cannot honestly say that's what happened, but my best guess from what I've learned today. So, this is a shot of Mound House, and this is the depot, the joint depot with the Carson, Colorado, and the V&T. This is the Carson and Colorado side, and this is the Virginia and Truckee side. Also, I believe this is the water tower, which just recently has a set of plans in the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. And I have heard a rumor, I believe Cliff will can tell me that there are corrections that need to be made to that set of plans. But this is the Mound House Depot, the passenger depot that was built for the Carson and Colorado and the Virginia and Truckee. I built a model of that, and I should mention that this is a photo of the model, but this was actually just built as a mock-up of the depot. The walls are simply cardstock, and they were covered with a siding paper just to see how it would look. And the roof is cardboard, and it was covered with a shingle paper which I printed out on my printer. It was a quick way to see if the roof that I was building was anywhere close to being right. My major concern on building this and the set of plans was getting the roof to look something close to being right, because it is one of the more complex parts of the structure. The rest of the structure, so let's go back. The rest of the structure is basically just a box, and there's nothing really major to building it. And yes, I will admit, I cut this out with my Cricut, so if you want to know, it was built on the Cricut. After I had gotten the roof in there, then I wanted to make sure that the roof supports were right. So I made a jig and started building roof supports and installed them just to see that whether the roof was actually going to look halfway reasonable. And it came out. This is a shot of the V&T side of the depot. This was also cut out on the Cricut, but I used styrene board and bat and siding instead of the cardstock. The one door is custom built. The rest of these are Tichy door and windows, which come to fit the measurements almost exactly, and it's much easier to buy a commercial part that somebody spent a lot of time designing rather than reinventing the wheel and redoing it, and then have to make a bunch of them. This is the other side of the building. Also, another interesting thing, I managed to convince my wife to make the sign for the roof. She did that in Photoshop and printed it out for me. And actually, this is a copy of the Mound House sign, which is in the Nevada State Museum in the Mint building, I believe. The other depot is the one I talked about last year or the year before, and I'll throw a little bit about that. It's an HO structure. I should mention, by the way, that both the freight depot and the passenger depot are going to be in the auction. So you can look at them and, if you wish, bid on them. I don't have room to keep them. My piano top has been covered with buildings. So. The freight, I should talk a little bit about the freight platform. The passenger depot, or the freight depot, was built on a frame, and I built that entirely out of styrene, and then painted and weathered. And I had to make several jigs to get the spacing and to keep everything at a reasonable angle. And this is another jig. There's two different parts of the platform which have different spacing for their braces. And another shot. The sidewalls for the freight depot were also cut out of styrene on my Cricut, like I said last year. And by the way, my workbench here is the dining room table, which gets cleared probably about 3 days out of the year. When my daughter visits, we actually use the dining room table sometimes. I think I have just done it. Any questions?
You gonna auction off the jig?
I'm sorry?
The jig is quite a project in itself there.
Yeah,
You gotta auction that off, that's what I was saying.
yeah, I'm auctioning both off. If you have space for it, it's
No, I meant the jig, you know the jig you used?
I
think the frame, that was incredible.
it's a lot of strip wood went into that.
Yeah, that was quite a project in itself. Okay.
Anything else?
Okay, we've been at this an hour. Anybody need to take a break? A couple minutes? Everybody okay? We're okay? Okay. Bob Harris finished his mogul, he says. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Let's take a look at it. Thanks, Bob.
I guess it was 2 years ago now, I presented a presentation. I presented a presentation on how I was using 3D drafting to build an engine I have long wanted, a model based on Virginia and Truckee moguls, particularly 13, but also 4. And that project is now done. These are the finished models, closing. They were actually just finished a couple of weeks ago, after going to Colorado, I decided I needed to have a tin roof on my cabs. So, I'm there. This is where I was a year ago. I was prepared to show you number 5. This was painted, not decaled, and you see the tins out there. I consider her 95% complete, but you know, we had to cancel. But there's number 5 Endurance now, completed. And her sister, number 7, the Fortitude. 5 is the Endurance, 7 is the, but anyway, I have a little, the question is, how do they run? And can I have the video now, please? Good time to catch up on maps, guys.
Turn sound on. That will help.
This part is obviously done on my safety back. This is lit by the shop light, so it's a little red. The way out is daylight lit. guys survived. I would like to point out that I drew the first drawing for that engine a little over 4 years ago. Let's want to talk about a little bit about paint for the next one who runs this gauntlet of paint. We have today, we are blessed to have some researchers doing a lot of work on paint. So we have a better picture of what paint on the engines actually looked like. This is the Glenbrook up in Antonito. However, knowing what it looked like and matching it are two different things. I was given several suggestions. I was told to match a Dr. Pepper can. Suggested was True Scale TCP 132, Chicago and Northwest, Great Western for Sioux line maroon. That on the cardboard next to the Pepsi can is the top color. I chose Vallejo brown color. And the difference between the two pictures is the difference between outdoor lighting and interior lighting. And you can see how the light that you're going to do the model in really affects the choice you make. Because when you're just comparing it to the Dr. Pepper can, in the interior, under the south line, the Dr. Pepper is better to the Sioux maroon, but in the daylight, it's better to the Vallejo. So it's something to consider when you choose what color to paint. That was my experience. I went with the Vallejo Calvary brown. You know, I would like to recognize the help I've gotten from others in doing this project. I couldn't have done it without the help I got. Particularly starting with Mike Collins, who provided me the plans that I worked from. Brian Blake, his smoke box cover that I used. Daniel Bolton did the stack. Hogan Nelson did the pilot for me. Bernard Scooter, I believe is the way it's pronounced. He did the builder plates on the nose on the side of the smoke box. And Joe Boom did the decals 13 years ago when I thought brass import was coming. And this is a celebration for me. Thank you for sharing it with me. Is there any questions?
I forgot how you did the frame. Did you scratch build the frame?
No, I 3D printed the frame. Shapeways offers brass printing. And I have the models here with me. They'll be on display tomorrow. I also brought some of the prototype prints so you guys can see how it all goes together. I printed first in it was fun when I started. Now it's something else they call it. But to get the size, make sure the size is right, then I can spend the extra money for the brass. And the extra money is considerable. But, pardon?
What a project.
It was. It would have been a lot harder without Mike's drawings. I also wanted to mention Don Ball blinded my drivers for me. That was a difficult project, even with I had a set of Greenway drivers were the old Balboa with the metal centers, but the other ones were imported from Britain. They had plastic centers. So I know you have to be real careful with the heat to remove that flange to keep from building that driver. And that's been a very tedious operation for him.
How did you approach the drivetrain?
Drivetrain was actually kind of dictated by the small size of the boiler. I couldn't get a motor in it. And I just played around. One of the guys that have the CD drawings, you just take the gearbox and find one that fits it. and I use the Northwest Shoreline gearbox. And, excuse me. And then the motor, along with the sound decoder, a keep alive, and a Super Cube speaker, all jammed into the tender. If I would do one thing different, I would not have used a United tender. I would have used the AHM or a Mound tender. Just because I had excuse me, a vocal tank. Excuse me. Burning out decoders in this.
Did you have any kind of additional, in addition to the 3D brass, weights put over the drivers to help give pull power to the locomotives? They seem to pull real well.
Yeah, the from the gearbox to the smoke box is full with titanium clock car weights.
Okay,
What scale?
thank you.
Oh, it's a joke.
All right, we've all heard the exciting news that number 11, the Reno, is back in town. And that was kind of a fun, news to hear. I had no idea it was coming back until it was here. So that was great, great news. And Mike Collins has decided to talk about how the models of, especially the PFM model of the Reno compares to the real McCoy. It should be interesting to see how it holds up. I can't wait to go up and see it. Can we go see it? Is it visible somewhere? We're going to make a beeline for you as soon as I can. All right, Mike.
You missed that today, huh?
Yes, I wasn't there. Sorry. No, you guys saw it today, huh? Yeah, of course.
You'll be there tomorrow.
This is when it was coming into town and the window went up there, and I was able to get a couple of pictures of it while they were moving it in. That's the 41st Hunter that's pushing it in on the spot where you saw it today. I was going to talk on the PFM version. Uh-oh, I just did something there. There we go. All right. Good. Got it? Yep. Okay, sorry. So we'll do a comparison of the Reno with the Pacific Fast Mail HO model of the Reno. So let's look at the three Baldwin 440s that the V&T purchased. Number 11, the Reno in 1872, which was a class number 27, 1/2C, and the 350 locomotive built to that class. Drawing number 20. Number 12, the Genoa in 1872, which actually arrived in 1873 on the V&T. Class number 8/26C, the 33rd locomotive built to that class, drawing number 2. And then the Inyo, number 22 in 1875, class number 8/26C, the 78th locomotive built to that same class, drawing number 2. Now, the three locomotives were built to the same drawing. Baldwin changed the classification numbering system between the Reno and the Genoa. The three locomotives are on the same drawing, so we can use the drawing number 20, and it's also called drawing number 2. The classification number, when they were using the 27.5C, they were running into problems between the 260s and the 060s, which were using the same class number. So they changed it over to this new class number, which is the 8, indicates the number of wheels. The 26 is the size of the cylinders. The C means it's a 440, and of course the 33 is the 33rd locomotive of that series. But you go back and look at the Reno, and there was like 350 locomotives built to that one version. Well, here's the building specs for the Reno, and I know you can't read all this up there. You can find these on the internet. They're out there. and it's lettered as Virginia City and Truckee River. Now, I was talking to Jim Hoagie today, and I said, did you letter it as the V&TRRHS? And he said, no. So, but the first two locomotives that arrived from Baldwin, the 4 and the 5, were lettered as V&TRRHS. And then finally, Yarrington wrote to him and said, hey, drop the C. So after that, then they started writing them as V&TRRHS. And if we go here to the Genoa and the Inyo, you will see that it says Virginia and Truckee Railroad. And that's August 5th, 1872 there on the Genoa. And on the Inyo is 12 of 1874, I think, over there on the right-hand side. So that's the specifications for the locomotives. If you look over here, let me see if I get the light here. It'll tell you what painting style, okay, and up to this point, they weren't using the class numbers at this time. Over here, you'll see on the Inyo, it says class style number 1, okay? So this is the first, one of the first locomotives that came out with the style number 1. I think the 19, the 20, and the 21 all had this style number 1. The thinking is that probably the Genoa would have probably been built about the same paint style, but it hadn't, Baldwin hadn't come out with the styles numbers at that time. So what I did, I took all that information and put it into kind of like a spreadsheet, and you go down through the list and you'll see that there's not very much difference between any of the locomotives, of the 3 locomotives. All right, let me go back. Okay, drawing number 20 shows a straight boiler and 2 steam domes with a sand dome in between the 2 domes and the diamond stack. In addition, an end view on that drawing shows a wagon top boiler, and also there's a diagram of the wagon top on the side view a little bit. So either a straight or a wagon top boiler could be built from the same drawing. And this is I don't know what locomotive this is, but it is a drawing basically on that same drawing. You can see the 2 steam domes up there, and the sand dome in the middle, the diamond stack, a cab, and I was talking to Jim about lettering on top of the, go back, flangeway up here on the tender, and it looks like there's lettering up there on the tender on that particular locomotive.
Besides the driving wheels, they look really big on that photo.
Yeah, even on the drawings, you could have a different size drivers. Okay, some of them were, the V&Ts were 67 and 67 inch, 56 and 3/4 on the Reno and the Genoa, and 57 on the Inyo. But you could go up to 60 or 63 inch drivers on some of those. Yeah, the basic thing was the size of the cylinders. 16 by 14 on the V&T locomotives. So the first drawing that I've seen of this is the Frederick Shaw drawing, which is about 1950 of the Reno, and this was in Beebe's book. Shaw had in his own book, and I think CSLR has the master of this, Stephen.
Right.
Yeah. So the master of this is down at Sacramento, and if you look at this, you can see. That Shaw did a very good job of it. He did kind of put the style 1 in there on the Reno, and he's got the builder's plate in the middle, and he's got the bonnet stack, okay, and supposedly all 3 locomotives had the bonnet stack. Well, here's our PFM version of this. Pretty close. The tender sits a little bit higher, and I think the reason for that is because the motor was in the tender, so they had to raise it up a little bit, and but other than that, it's pretty close. Represents what Frederick Shaw had drawn. Now here's the first picture that we have of the Reno, and this was taken in 1876 to 1878 by Watkins and in Carson City. In this particular case, it has a diamond stack on it, and it has a 6-inch air pump right here in the middle. So by this time, in 1874, the V&T had converted their passenger trains to straight air. So one of the changes you want to make, the other thing is on the pilot, it's all nice and smooth up here. Okay, you got the iron pilot. The headlight bracket is a Baldwin headlight bracket, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The bell is a fancy bell, and you can buy these bells in HOCL through, Bowser, I think, has them, yeah. Kerry made them, I think, wasn't it?
Calscan.
No, Calscan didn't make that one. This is another one. I think Kerry was the company that made it. Calscan has a bell, but it's not that bell. So here's straight air, 6-inch straight air added to the Reno and the Joy. So you have a 6-inch air pump over here. Your air comes in on the bottom here. Here's your air intake. You have a piston up here that drives, and a piston and a rod down here that pumps the air in and puts it into a big tank. This tank is usually behind the rear driver, in between the frame. It goes up into the engineer's cab, and here's your valve. And then when the engineer, and then it goes on down through pipes into either the tender or the coach, and out to another series of pipes into the next car. And now you notice that there's 2 lines coming out of this. And the reason for this, they didn't have cutoff valves on the couplers here. So if you put air into it, and you put air into it to stop the train, it wasn't the other way around. There was no air in the cars when you were running, so they were free rolling. So you had to couple everything back together. And I think we'll show a picture of this tomorrow on the Crown Point trestle. So this is basically what it looked like. Here's your 6-inch air pump. Here's your coupling. You're no glad hands in a sense, but this is what the coupling was like. And then you had the valve coming out of the tender and going in. This one they had the brake on the tender, and they didn't have it on the tender on the V&T. Goes into the passenger coach. Here's your brake cylinder right here, and here's your brakes. And then you had the double hoses. So they have a couple of hoses on the end, so the air wouldn't run out. This is basically a drawing of that locomotive at that time in circular 1878 on the V&T. The one thing on here is on the tender, the rivets didn't go horizontal, they went vertical. There was like 6 rows of rivets vertically on this tender. The next photo we have is roughly 1890. This is Crockwell. Crockwell was a photographer in Virginia City, and he left and went back to Utah in about 1890. Now we have the bonnet stack. We have the 6.6 air pump, but they've changed a little bit. They took the lubricator off up here, and it looks like they probably had a hydrotechnic lubricator inside the cab. You can barely see the rivets here on the tender, okay? And other than that, maybe I think they changed the headlight bracket. I'm not sure if they changed it this time or later. And one thing I'll talk about, let me go back a minute. We'll talk about the cab up here in a minute, okay? Show you a picture of this. All right, pop valves are added. This is off of the Sonoma down in Sacramento. This is the old type of valves that they had on it. This is Hart Corbett's model of the PFM model. All right, here's a picture of Bob Dockery, who probably before Photoshop, he would take these things into his dark room, and then he would copy them on a 4x5 camera, graphics camera, and then he would work on them and pull out the information that he needed. So this is one of his pictures of the split picture of the 2 locomotives. You notice here's the air intake coming in on here on this earlier version. Here's the lubricator up here. Over here, the air intake's back down here, and we have an injector now over here. And here we had the water pump, okay? Now look up here at the cab. Okay, you have the cab coming across and it rises up, and look where it goes across on the dome. Right here, it goes straight across, and look where it is on the dome. So you raise this cab up about 6 inches. Here's a good shot that shows those rivets, vertical rivets on the tender, okay? So why they raised the cab, we don't know. But for some reason, they decided that they wanted to raise it. Notice the height between the engineer and the top of the cab window here, all right? So what I did, I went back and here's a picture of the CP locomotive that actually was started out on the Western Pacific, which was the line over in the east, not the Western Pacific that we know of today. But this is a straight boiler, and you see where the cab is here, and then you see where the engineer is. His head is about hitting the cab. Well, this cab is about 3 inches shorter than the cabs on the Reno and the Genoa to start with. So what they did, when they put a wagon top boiler on these things, they raised the cab another 3 inches up to correspond to the top of the, not the actual top of it, but to the edge of the dome on the steam dome there. So here's my version of it with a taller cab in about 1890s. I went back and did some changes on this later, and I looked at the cab that we have on the old cab is on the 18, the Dayton, and it comes out just about 6 feet. So I used that cab, and so the line will be a little bit shorter on this one when I get back to work on this drawing. And here we have the injector, and we have the difference in the 6-inch air pump. And then I think we go back to the old style headlight bracket, yeah. All right, 1901, they modified the Reno again. Still Lincoln pin coupler on the front. By this time they had converted to the Miller couplers on the passenger train. So there was a Miller attachment on the rear of the tender, which we have to find a picture of. Here's an 8-inch, this is what we call an 8-inch air pump. You have another air tank, and we have brakes on the wheels here at this point. So they finally put engine brakes on. Here's your air brake cylinder right here, and an 8-inch pump. Now, I started to draw up an 8-inch air pump based on some information I got in some Westinghouse air brake books, and it just wasn't coming out right. And I was reading some notes on it. Well, they had 2 8-inch air pumps. After they came out with a 9.5-inch air pump, they built a new 8-inch air pump. So now I got to go find the drawing of the earlier 8-inch air pump. Nobody makes an 8-inch air pump in HO scale that I know of. And so I didn't go and work on this drawing anymore. But here's a more detailed shot of that. Here's your extra tank up here, 8-inch air pump. Here, this is the Baldwin name, or not Baldwin, Westinghouse name on it. Here's your air brake cylinder, rod coming down, and then here's your driver brakes. So if you want to go about 1900, there's your injector. You take off the water pump and then put that on. This time they also changed the skin on the tender, and you got double rows of rivets offset horizontally going across, and there's a vertical row like Andrew was showing on his modification of the Dayton. 1907, we come up with a oil burner. This is the first oil burner on the V&T. So you have the straight stack, you had a different headlight bracket up here, higher up. You had the injector up further up. And there's your the 9.5-inch air pump now on this here. Automatic train brakes, okay? So instead of having straight air, everything was automatic. This is the PFM version that they also came out with. Here's your 9.5-inch air pump. Here's your equalizing reservoir and your auxiliary reservoir. Your air brakes on here. Now they put air brake cylinder, and they put the brakes here, but they didn't. They reversed them in the sense that this brake should be in the front. Okay. And they got the right rivets on it now. So motor mounted the tender. Later models had the motors in the cab. but that raised up the height of the boiler, so your boiler, instead of being down sitting on here, was up a little bit higher.
Mike,
Yes,
that's a tender drive version right there, isn't it?
that is the tender, yeah.
Okay, when they came out with the cab drive version, they fixed the brake shoe issue.
Did they fix the brake
Yeah,
shoe?
because I have two of the cab drive models in my collection, and the front brake shoe is where it's supposed to be.
All right, good. And the other thing is on the sander, it went to Lynch double D sanders over here, so that the later model had that too.
Yeah, and the later model, the sandpipes actually come down in front of the brake shoe.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what the one with the motor in the cab. This one here is still the motor in the. You can see the shaft here going in. Okay, here's my model of it. I like the old headlight, so I put the old headlight on instead of the electric headlight. Well, this is 1917 now. We're up 1917. Put the generator on, and the pipe come all the way back here. If you looked at the Reno today, the generator that's on here is down in here. They stuck it down in here for the movie studios, okay? So so it wouldn't be up here on the model, but the actual generator is actually on the locomotive today. Comparison of the two locomotives. Electric headlight generator out of 1917, running board extended. This running board is right here, stands out a little bit. 2 steps on the tender now. Safety handrails, longer handrails on here and on here. Only 1 step on the back. Originally it didn't have a step on the back. They did have a step on the back. But you got new handrails, safety appliances and stuff like that. A toolbox up here now, they moved the toolboxes back and put you had to have a sandbox up there. On an oil burning locomotive, you had a sandbox, so you would throw sand into the fire box to clean out the junk in there. We did that on our steam engine down in Sacramento. Al Phelps photo, 41, or is it 38?
37.
37? Okay. Oh, okay, I got it up there, don't I? Electric headlight with the star. Oh, Steven said, oh yeah, you got to put the star up there. See the star on top of the headlight? All right.
Who makes those in HO?
Huh?
Who makes those in HO? Star. Yeah.
You? I don't know. Oh, and you got the.
Is there a story behind the star? I mean, where did that come from? It's a
Huh?
Russian star. It's a what?
Russian star.
It's a star, just a single star up there on top of the headlight. Yeah, something the V&T added. And of course you had the marker lights up here now, the bracket up here, and the brackets on the engine today too. Equalize the reservoir and the other reservoir, and then the main reservoir back here behind the driver. Sold a metric roller Meyer in March of 1945. And this is my version of it in 1917 and 1918. I just finished this drawing a couple of days ago. I got to go back and do a little bit of work on it. And an interesting thing, I took a bunch of pictures of the eccentric rods on the locomotive, and I got those in the drawing here this time. I didn't have them on the other drawings originally. 9.5-inch air pump, equalizing reservoir, and the other reservoir, and then the main tank's back in here. You can just see it. The double rivets, the safety steps, okay, or safety handrails, and of course here's what we kind of saw today with the tender on behind it, and they're up there. They were working on the roof. He's going to move it. I think Steven said they're going to move it out there pretty soon, put it over back in the shop before winter time. Okay, let's look at the Genoa. Model Railroader magazine of July 1950 had this nice drawing of the Genoa in there that does not give the name of the draftsman, but it's pretty similar to, probably was taken down in Oakland, because that's the Oakland Roundhouse up there. And 1 single roll of rivets going across, okay. He says 25-inch driver wheels, but by that time it should have been 26-inch. they wore down an inch. And the V&T had a habit of changing, going from 26 to 28, especially on the tender wheels. And then they go back to 26, and so you could either use a 28 or a 26-inch wheel for that. And here's a picture of it in 1889, 1990. This is another Crockwell picture. Pretty much what you see there is similar to what you saw in the Reno earlier. It's got the 6-inch air pump on it. And the snow plow is covered with, for snow fighting. So there's your earlier plow right there, Cliff. Notice where the cab is, okay? The cab comes up just up to the edge of the dome there. So there's my drawing of it. Air, water pumps on it, no brakes yet. All right, single row of rivets going across. 1902, it was taken into the shop and rebuilt. Came out painted all black accordingly, except for the boiler jacket, which was still Russian iron. At this point, it has the air brake cylinder here. Here's the air brake cylinder. Here's your brakes here. Converted injector going across. They use the old intake pipe here on this side. The other side has the other one on it. Has the square bracket, headlight bracket. This is a V&T or an earlier Baldwin type bracket. Another picture of it at Virginia City. Up on the Crown Point trestle. Here you have the smokestack, the sunflower smokestack, and you still have the old headlight. All right, still burning the coal oil or lamp or whatever they were using then. Still the wood burner. Another picture of it in Reno at the water tank. This came out of Dave Farrell's collection. Split pilot on the coupler. You got 1902. They got the automatic couplers on them, and you have a pushing pole here. No step bracket over here, but you see a step down here on the bottom where the fireman or engineer, whoever he was, rode, probably the two brakemen, rode on the front of the engine. It was used mainly down on the Minden branch, 1902 to about 1908. It was sold in 1938 to Hungerford, went on railroads at Parade, and ended up back with Railway Locomotive Historical Society, and I think it ended up someplace else. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here's my drawing of it in the 1902 version. Kyle wanted some information that, so I went back and redrew this with all the information I could, and then Kyle came back and gave me all the corrections. So I don't know if I got them all in there, Kyle, but I hope I did. But you draw these things up, and then you send them out to various people like Stephen or Kyle or Jim Wilkie or them, and they come back and say, okay, do this and do that. So it's not just one person doing the drawing, it's many people that are putting the effort into getting the drawing done. So I have to compliment them on all the help I get. And here it is, down in Sacramento, with the 16 behind it, the V&T number 16 behind it. And I didn't realize that Judy Pasatino was the one that took this photograph. Her husband was old UP Joe, and he did a lot of work down in the museum in the early days. Him and Ken Joe did a lot of work on these engines when they were rebuilding them and stuff. All right, let's look at the Inyo. Circle 1890 in Virginia City. Here's your builder's plate here. The main difference on the Inyo between the other ones is you got an extra handrail up here. All right, 3 sets of handrails instead of 2 handrails. The original Baldwin cab bracket, and smooth. The Genoa and the Reno got fancy cab covers. The Inyo did not. Okay, later on. And I think on this one you had 2 rows of rivets going across. Yeah, I got 2 rows of rivets on this. This would be about that period of time, okay? A later version of it, here's your, looks like an 8-inch air pump on it. This is, of course, in Virginia City. This is a photograph that Bob Dockery found, and they kept blowing it up to get better detail off of it. Stanley Palmer shot of it with the sunflower smokestack. As far as we know, the Reno never had the sunflower smokestack. We have not found any photographs of it with that type of stack. It went from basically the bonnet stack up to the straight stack when it got converted to oil. But pretty similar to the Genoa. Oh, I had to put this picture in. Stephen did a nice book on the 22, okay, and he used this picture in the inside of the book, and I have the same postcard. It says here, earthquakes may come and earthquakes may go, but I'll stay resided, I think, in San Francisco field, dated 5/1 of 06. So this is just after the big earthquake in San Francisco. But a neat shot of the 22 in Commercial Street in Reno, I'm sorry, in Reno. So this is Commercial Street, the SP depot over here on the right-hand side, over here. Several pictures of it. Earlier picture here with the, probably, it could be the 8-inch air pump at this time still. These are pictures when they were getting it ready to sell to Paramount Pictures. So they put the sunflower, they put the old sunflower stacks back on it for that and a different headlight on it. And they still had the old Baldwin style bracket for the headlight. And it was converted into, I should have put this in before I did the other one, 1910 into an oil burner just like the Reno. And you notice here, here's your smooth front. Here's your tender, your steps on the Pilot, which they added later on the V&T. Here's your push-pull, 9.5-inch air pump, of course, and injectors going out here. One of these, I think this is the drain line coming off of the air pump here. Oh, and I put this picture in. This is a good detail. It shows you the new safety handrails that came all the way down to the bracket here from the cab. The longer handrails here on the tender. Here's your sandbox up here in front of your toolbox now, and then double steps over here. Okay. So this is a model that I bought from a guy that I worked with at one of the hobby shops, and he took one of the earlier Renos, got a AHM cab or a tender oil tank off of one of their Renos, and then added it and put the cap stack on it. That's kind of neat locomotive. I never have run it or anything. It just sits on the shelf there. And of course here it is running in Carson City here. Okay, important dates. Okay, November 1874, straight air added to passenger train, 6-inch air pump. Both Reno and Genoa. June of 1878, Miller platforms and hooks. March of 1891, upgraded to 8-inch air pump. 1897, Sam's couplers replaced Lincoln Pit couplers. 1898, automatic air brakes applied, engine brakes added, 9.5-inch air pumps added or applied. March and June of 1902, tower couplers added, wood pilots replaced the iron pilots. June of 1907, Reno converted to oil burner. 1908, Genoa retired, Nerver converted to an oil burner, sold in 1938. December 1910, Inyo converted to oil burner. And December 1917, Pyle National Steam Generator electric lights added. September of 1926, Inyo retired, sold 1937. March of 1945, the Reno was actually used in the movie also, and it was wrecked down there in a scene they turned it over and bent the frame a little bit, and they had to fix it up. Got it back to the V&T, and then they turned around and sold it to MGM in 1945. So here's Hart's locomotive, and here's my version of the PFM Julie Boulette with the cab or the baggage door in it. Special thanks to Stephen Drew, Peter Gerlich. Peter Gerlich is a person over in Australia. He worked a lot with Stephen and myself on doing real detailed drawings of this, of the Reno and of the 3 locomotives. He picked out a lot of stuff that I never even saw on it. So I have to give a lot of credit to him for what he's done on these locomotives. He is a jeweler in Australia. He ended up getting married, and we haven't heard from him since. And of course, Daryl DiPano, who did took the drawing of 20 and redid it, and he sold those for a while on the market here. And of course, the late Bob Dockery, who did all the photo work and did a lot of these photos you see that he took and redid them and brought out a lot of the detail. So I call him the pre-Photoshop guy. Of course, photos came from UNR, Nevada Historic Society, California State Railroad Museum, Nevada State Library, and various other sources wherever we could find them. That's it. Questions?
Why was the Genoa retired so comparatively early?
We didn't need it any longer.
Not broken, not wear and tear issue, just set it aside.
Huh?
Just set it aside.
We set it aside and it just sat there. And they converted it in 1902 to what you saw there. And around 6 or 8, they did another conversion on it. They did the double air sander on it. And when the museum restored it, they restored it back to 1902 because that's the best photos we had of it at the time. But a lot of their locomotives, they didn't sell them, they just sat in the shop. After 1881, they started selling everything off. Whatever they could get rid of, they sold. 4 of them went up to Canada to help build the Canadian Pacific Railroad. 2 of them went up to Oregon. A couple of them went up to Washington. And some of them went over into the Sierras. Boca Loyalton. What was the other one over there?
Fairdive lumber.
Yeah, okay. So, they got rid of what they could, and what they couldn't get rid of, they just left it in the shop. Hunter Ford was looking for a locomotive for the railroads on parade, and Gilbert Deese was the one that really talked to the V&T and got the locomotive for him. And then he ended up getting it back from him eventually. It was up at Portola for a while, and then they shipped it down to LA, or not LA, I mean Oakland. And it sat down there until the museum got it from Railway Locomotive Historical Society. And the other ones were sold to the movie studios. They were, when Union Pacific came out, they needed locomotives for that, and so a lot of your stuff went over there then. Luckily for that, we have them today. Otherwise they would have been gone by now, probably.
Do you have any thoughts about what they're going to do with number 11, the Reno? How they're going to restore it, to what time period?
Well, he's working on that. Yeah. I think one of these days he'd like to get it running again, but it's gonna take money. Yeah.
All you need is cash.
Yeah. It has the original lap seam boiler on it. It had been riveted over the seams with a plate. When they were running it down in Phoenix or down in Old Tucson, it was running under 100 pounds pressure. Okay, it was normally 130 pound pressure locomotive. And then they converted it to air, pushed it by air instead of by steam. All right, so they cut into it and did some work there. So it would take some work. Looking at the locomotive, it's in pretty good shape, really, even after the fire in 1995. They put a new cab on it at that time, and then they kind of framed up the tender a little bit, which is kind of falling apart, so they got to redo the tender frame. I think they're starting to work on that, and they did tack down on the top of the new roof. The roof that's on it now is after the 1995 fire. Okay, and they ran a couple of movies after that with it. Yeah. But it's not in too bad shape, you know.
Considering what it's been through.
Yeah, it's only a 150-year-old locomotive, you know. What do you expect?
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
The cab that Tucson replaced, put it on it, did that come from another locomotive, or was that built up in a wood shop somewhere?
No, that was built down there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a old Tucson prop. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and I thought Dee Betano might have built it. Yeah, for him. He went down there and did some work on it. Yeah. Kyle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is as it is.
Yeah.
I was down there in '95 shortly after the fire, and basically all the wood that was on it was gone.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, we're looking at the pilot today on it, and it looks like it was burnt. So I don't know, was that the original wood pilot?
I'd have to look at my photos from '95.
Okay.
What was there, because I saw it there, I photographed it.
Yeah, I think you gave me a bunch of photos of it from after the fire, yeah. I have to go back and look at that, yeah. But, we'll see what happens with it. Hopefully it, you know, he's gonna do what he can. He wants to build a building for it so he can sit inside and people can look at it right now. And then, you know, they're starting to do some work on it, just trying to fix up some of the things that need to be fixed, not to restoration as much as just to get it in kind of in shape for now. Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah.
Mike, the rumor I got about 2 weeks ago from Ed Gallegos, fireman on the 18, was that he was wanting, I don't know if he'll follow through, but he was wanting, Tom was wanting to restore it circa 1940 because that's what his dad photographed it as.
Okay.
That
So
makes sense.
it would be more of a, like it is, you know, after the electric headlight and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, we'll just have to see what happens as it goes down the road. You tear into something and then you determine what's there and what you can build as you restore it. You know, like the Genoa was built back to 1902, automatic couplers, air brakes and all that. It could be run if they wanted to run it. It did run. Stephen was in it. Well, I think we saw a video last time. Stephen in the cab of it running back in Sacramento in 1975. So it's operable, all right? And we have the Inyo down here that's operable. So they can be operable. You just can't put 130 pounds of pressure in the boiler. And if he wants to run any cars with it, then that's going to be another issue too. Yeah. Because these are heavier cars that he has up here today, that like we rode in today, versus the 30-foot cars that the V&T use. So, all right, that's it, I think.
Right. I never saw a version of the Reno I didn't like, so whatever they end up doing, I'm sure will be splendid. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And certainly contact me if you want to do some modeling in the future, get the benefits that come with it. And thanks again, okay?
Mike?
Yes?
Vendor room will be out, I'm going to open it at 6 for those vendors that didn't get in today.
6?
At 6 a.m.
Okay.
They'll be able to come in and set up.
6 a.m.?
Yep.
And what time does it open tomorrow morning?
Well, it'll just stay open. You know, we'll have the traditional meet and greet, I think, was at 8 or 8:30 tomorrow morning or something.
Yeah, I think the program starts at 9 tomorrow, I think.